Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Grecia, and I am a third year political science and international development studies student at the University of Toronto. And I am here with a lovely guest today. I am a representative of the Pre-Law Shadowers organization dedicated to educating students on, the legal processes of becoming a lawyer and, having some advice from professionals and other students as well. So I would just like to give a chance for our guests to introduce themselves, if you could please.
Sure. Thanks, Gracia. I'm also very happy to be here. My name's Isaac. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I work at Lack and Afolabi Law. It's a defense firm in London, Ontario. But we do matters all around southwestern Ontario, primarily London, but also Kitchener, St. Thomas, Woodstock, and other surrounding areas. I am currently about 2.5 years into being a lawyer. I've only done criminal law for my entire career. I did do a brief stint with the Crown's office as a summer student, and I also previously worked for a criminal defense firm in Toronto for a little bit before moving out here in London to complete my articling as well as starting my legal career here. Our practice is primarily sex assault, domestic assault, litigation. I also have a pretty sizable youth practice as well, because that's something that I'm particularly interested in. But aside from that, that's it from me.
Perfect. Well, thank you. We'd love to have you here today and get to know more about you. So I'll begin with a question of, at what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to pursue a legal career?
Probably, I think grade eight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. Yeah, probably. I want to say when I was 14, 13 or 14 years old.
Wow. Okay. That's really young. But could you tell us what exactly, made you start thinking about becoming a lawyer when you were that young?
Well, I guess to give you an abridged version of why, I have some experience doing some outreach to a First Nations reserve in Northern Ontario called White Dog through my church. I'm originally from Toronto, and so I guess when I started going there, I began to open my eyes to another part of Canada that I was totally unaware of. And I got to see firsthand a lot of the injustices and a lot of very saddening things in the community. And I think that really started my curiosity as to how come I don't know about this stuff. And I'd read about it in school a little bit, but it wasn't really covered. And that brought me, I guess, it sparked a curiosity in me to understand, you know, how this is happening, why there's drug abuse at such a young age, why there are kids my age at 14 that are kind of revolving in and out of the criminal justice system and things like that. And I was involved with that community for a very long time, and I still am to this day. But that really sparked my interest as to my first kind of view of injustice. And that continued with my pursuit in undergrad, looking into criminology and sociology. And in criminology, you get to learn about the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system. And that kind of further burned this fire, that little spark in me that was like, what's wrong? Why is this injustice happening? To, wow, it's actually quite shocking, the number of Indigenous people that are in our justice system and how they form such a small percentage of our actual population. But in the prison systems, they're a sizable population there. For instance, women's prisons, 40% of incarcerated women in our prisons are Indigenous women. So we're trying to understand that from I guess, a legal perspective, a sociological perspective. Yeah, but that spark started when I was 14 years old, and that kind of continued with me and only further grew as I went through undergraduate and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, as an undergraduate student as well in political science and stuff, so I'm studying a lot of, being in Canada. It's one of the things that you primarily study, and those in like injustices. I understand anger and the wanting to understand the reasoning behind and all those things. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really, um, insight into your inspiration for that. So, going into your undergrad, you studied criminology at the University of Toronto, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So what courses, you said about you learned a lot about the Indigenous injustices. So what courses specifically maybe like made you decide, or like not decide, but furthered your, inspiration and your knowledge about that?
Um, well, I'm not sure how criminology programs work in other universities, but at U of T, we had literally a class called criminal law. And that was being taught at the time by a defense lawyer by the name of Breeze Davies. And she's now a SCJ judge, Superior Court Justice. Yeah. But she was incredible. She was an absolutely incredible professor. She was a full-time defense lawyer at the time, but she would make the time obviously every week to teach that course. And so that was my beginning to really understanding how criminal law works. And it was great because it was being taught by an actual practitioner. Sometimes we go to university and our professors are like academics for their whole lives, right? Um, so they may not know or have the experience of actually working within the system. The great thing about Professor Davies was that she was a lawyer and she was in the system. And not only did she have knowledge of the criminal law, but she had the knowledge of the practice of criminal law. And so that's what was really, really helpful for me. I also took some courses in restorative justice, intersections between Indigenous law as well as criminal law. So in terms of like, if you really want to get an undergraduate peek into criminal law, like going to U of T, taking the criminology program. I don't know how much has changed since I was there, but it was really great. Had some great professors, and so those are the kind of the courses that I took. And I'm not gonna lie, the other courses that I took were bird courses because you need to get a good GPA to get into law school. So I took some courses of interest, but I also took some courses that weren't so relevant because it is very important that you have a good CGPA when you are applying to Canadian law schools and law schools abroad as well. So that was kind of what I did in undergrad.
Yes, well, CGPA is one of the main factors of admitting yourself into law school. So, on the other factor, on the LSAT, what courses and just in general, how was your experience studying for the LSAT and taking the LSAT?
My experience is horrible. I absolutely hated it. And I'm glad we have a guest. Hey, Sabrina, it's nice to have someone here watching. But
Hi.
it sucked. And I, my parents are both, church ministers, so we didn't grow up with a lot of money. So I felt a lot of guilt about asking them for like $2,000 for an LSAT prep course. And I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this and wanting to be a lawyer can relate to that. As a child of immigrants, you don't want to be asking your parents for things like that to assist you, and you kind of want to just like work off on your own. And so that's what I did. Um, I didn't take any courses. I had access to a bunch of practice tests. I went to the public library and I took out like prep books, whether it was Kaplan or some of the other ones, Princeton Review or whatever. I just went to any local library and I just took out those books. I probably scribbled in a lot of them, which is not good. And I did a lot of the practice tests. And to be honest, my first go at the LSAT was horrible. I did I did trash on the LSAT, and I didn't get into law school the first time around. And that's okay. I mean, it felt like the end of the world at the time, especially getting my score back and knowing full well that there's no chance I'm going to get into law school with those scores. But after I had that reality check, I had to study again, right? And what I realized that I did wrong the first time is I wasn't taking enough practice exams in timed environments. That's the key. If you are studying for the LSAT, but you're not taking practice exams in real time, like with actual timed environments, like you only get 3 hours. Like I'm going to do this in 3 hours. Doesn't matter. If you just kind of do it and you give yourself like 4 hours, you go for a lunch break here and there and stuff like that, you never really get prepared for the actual test. So I can't give you a recommendation of like what course I took, but what really made the difference is when I started taking these practice exams with actual real life situations. I was like, no, mom, dad, my brother, I was like, no one's bothering me for 3 hours. I'm in this room. I have a timer. I'm going to do this test. And you do that over and you do it over and over and over and over again until you're sick of it. And then you do it over and over again. And until you put those reps in, you're not going to do well. And that was the difference between me sucking the first time and then me getting a decent LSAT score the second time.
Yeah, definitely. Practice makes perfect experience, and I've heard that, a lot of advice from other lawyers as well. So, when you were studying for the LSAT, what were you doing it while you were in undergrad, or did you take some time off of university after university?
So when I initially studied for the LSAT, I was doing it during my last year. But like I said, I didn't get in the first time. So I ended up taking a gap year where all I did was I devoted all my attention to just studying for the LSAT. So I went to the library every single day, and I just took a practice test every single day. I gave myself like the weekends off, so I treated it like a job. Monday to Friday, I was at the library, I was taking tests, and I was doing times tests and stuff like that. But that's pretty much what I did for an entire summer. I worked a crappy retail job and I studied for my LSATs. And yeah, that's kind of how I went about it. Obviously, the first time I did it, I made all the excuses in the world. I'm doing undergrad at the same time. I got this, I got that, I got this. And so I was juggling multiple things. I think the focus of just saying, like, this is what I got to do. At the time, I was fortunate enough to have a very good CGPA. So I knew I got that part done. It was really about cleaning up my LSAT score, just being very focused on that one thing. And I got my butt kicked the first time. It was a huge, you know, awakening. Um, and I think that's what I needed to really like kind of burn the fire. So that's all to say, like, if you don't do well the first time or the second time and you don't get in, it's not the end of the world. I mean, you just go back into it and you try again.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you. And so you went to Osgoode, I think, for law school. Is that right? Yes. So what was your experience like there? Do you like it?
Uh, that's a loaded question. Did I like it? uh, this is being recorded. I, you know what? I think Osgoode is a good school. But I also think it was extremely expensive. Um, and I'm not sure that the cost really is justified, but it is what it is. I mean, if you're thinking about going to law school in Toronto, you got to prepare to be paying $30,000 a year, right? And that's just tuition and books. Um, I mean, if you're fortunate enough like me to be living with your parents throughout law school, you don't have to pay rent, hopefully. But that's not what it includes. But Osgoode, I would say as a school, it was a great school. It was a great school. For the most part, my professors were really great. The programs, the good thing about Osgoode is it is the largest common law school in Canada. So they do have resources and they do have unique programs that you can do. And I would say, like, if you are focused in on Bay Street, for instance, you want to get into big law, you want to do corporate, it's a great environment. You're in Toronto. And so you have all those resources for you, and you're in the city, you have those chances to really connect. But I also say, if you do want to get into criminal, there's some really, really great programs at Osgoode as well. And I know, Grace, that you were going to talk about the Innocence Project, but that was one of them. There's also a criminal intensive, which puts you with either a Crown's office, clerking with a judge, or a defense firm in Toronto, and it kind of allows you to shadow lawyers. So it was a really good program in that respect as well. So yeah, it was good. I mean, like any law school you go to, it's going to be extremely stressful, and most of the days you're going to hate it. But I would say overall, like I can't speak for other schools, but there's some good programs there, especially if you want to pursue criminal law. And for the most part, I would say the professors were great, and a lot of the criminal law courses were being taught by actual, again, practitioners, so people who are actually lawyers, which I would say you get some value from that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So academically, at least, it was a positive experience. Um, so is there specific courses that really stood out to you or that you'd recommend people to take, like for in law school or even particularly for your field?
Um, well, in your first year, you don't get a choice. You just have to take a bunch of like, first year, like you do property, you do civil, you do criminal, you do a little bit of everything. But once you do that first year, have an open mind, because everyone goes into law school thinking like they know exactly what type of law they want to practice. But go into that first year, put your efforts in everything. And sometimes the things that you think you won't like, you actually end up liking. And fortunately for me, I've always wanted to do criminal defense, and I kind of went into that area. So if you do want to pursue criminal defense, doing the criminal intensive, I think is a huge thing. You get to connect with some really, really talented, great lawyers, both in the defense bar as well as the prosecution. That is not just like, you don't just put your, you have to actually apply for that. So that's not something that you just choose, but you have to do an application and you get interviewed and see if you're appropriate for the program. Same with the Innocence Project. That was a very, very valuable experience for me. So again, that's you have to apply to that and do an interview and all that stuff as well. But I really enjoyed the Youth Criminal Justice Act course that I did. That was like a seminar style course. If you can do a seminar style course, it's a nice little switch up from law school, because it's not like just going to class and then taking a 100% exam and just throwing everything in one basket. Seminar courses at least allow you to write a paper, participate, and do other things to get graded. It's more similar to like an undergraduate course. So that was really valuable. I took a sex assault course, but I thought that was not helpful at all. But again, I mean, the professors change all the time, given that the people that are teaching these criminal law courses are oftentimes actual lawyers. So that's a big caveat. When I took Crim Pro, I had Justice Green teach it, and she was a phenomenal professor. So definitely take criminal procedure. Evidence, super important, and that's required. You have to take an evidence course. It's always going to be necessary. But yeah, I think that covers all the bases. It's really up to you. Like, just take the basics, right? For criminal courses, take the basics, and then definitely do the intensive. If you can get into the Innocence Project, that's a really good experience. And then it's up to you about going into one area or the other. There's a mental health course, there's a sexual assault course, and there's that kind of stuff. So it's up to you.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like there's a lot of variety, so that's really great for, everyone who has their different interests. But, you know, as you mentioned, Innocence Project, so could you tell us more about that experience?
Uh, yeah. I got at the time I was at the Innocence Project. It was with Professor Alan Young, who I believe is no longer doing that program. I'm not actually sure who is heading that program right now. But the really cool thing about the Innocence Project is you're reviewing files in which someone's been convicted or been found guilty, and you're essentially writing an application or beginning the process of writing an application to have that case reopened. My biggest takeaway is that is extremely difficult and slow moving to actually reopen cases, because I think as a society, we want to believe that when a decision is made about someone's guilt, that decision is legitimate. And so there's a lot of walls and barriers to get your case reopened. As much as you have this kind of like romanticized view of like, oh, everyone that's filing an application to have their, cases reopened are innocent, a lot of them are kind of like, probably not, right? And they're a little 50-50. So it's tough, but it's really interesting, because in order to have a legitimate shot, you're going to have to go through everything. That means all the trial transcripts, any sort of appeals that were made. And that could mean you're going through boxes on boxes on boxes of transcript. And you're just hoping for this one little thing that can give you a shot. My personal experience, there was a case that I worked on with Innocence Canada, which is like a larger organization. Um, it's the case of Brian Anderson. It's a murder conviction, Indigenous person in, I believe, Winnipeg. I think that's still in the process of review, just to say how extremely slow moving that is. If you're interested, I would strongly recommend you looking that up. I think CBC and other news outlets have done some videos on that case. Um, but that one's a really interesting one, and I think there were some serious and legitimate issues that should be explored in that case. I don't know to what extent I can talk about it, so I'll leave it there. But it's something to look forward to and keep updated on. It's a great experience, but you can't do much. I mean, you're only there for a semester, and if you can just assist maybe in this one little way, hopefully it becomes something else. But at the end of the day, most of these are just going to be duds. They're not really going to go anywhere.
Oh, but thank you. We really appreciate, your insight into that. And it sounds like a really incredible experience, very eye-opening, and you get to have a lot of, yeah, firsthand experience, especially as a student, because that can be really difficult to obtain.
Mhm.
So yeah, congratulations on having that experience, even if it was probably maybe not what you expected for it to be. Um, but you sound very passionate about your field of law, criminal defense. And what is your favorite thing about that field?
The appreciation of clients when you get an acquittal and when you get a good result, there is nothing better than just seeing the weight lifted off someone's shoulders after they hear the words not guilty. There's really nothing like that's irreplaceable. Um, when you win a case that you worked so hard on, you see the family in the body of the court crying, your clients hugging you. That is the best part. And client appreciation is the greatest. And a lot of days this job sucks. And a lot of days it doesn't work out exactly the way that you want it to. But you really reflect upon those moments and you realize why you're here, right? Because there are actual clients that you fight for that are factually or legally innocent and that are worth fighting for. And when you see that relief in their faces, in their bodies, it's like totally like an out of body experience almost. They're crying and they can't control their emotions. And you see that the work that you put into that file has directly resulted in an acquittal that is deserving. It's amazing. It really, really is amazing. And that's actually the really cool thing about criminal defense. You may work on a client's file on like, I don't know, acquisition, merge, or whatever. It's great, right? But you're dealing with lives, human lives, freedoms. You're dealing with the difference between, in some cases, never seeing your child again, being deported out of the country and being found innocent, right? And so that immediate reaction after getting a verdict is incredible. There's no higher high than that. And when the clients are appreciative of the work that you've done, it really keeps you going. And I've only been in this 2.5 years, but there are, even in those 2.5 years, there have been times where you're like, oh man, this is tough. Like this is not worth it. And then you get a phenomenal result, or you get a client texting you saying like, you saved my life, or you get a client saying like, I don't know what I could have done without you, right? And that really makes the difference, and you hold on to that. And so that's the best thing about my job. The other cool thing is, aside from that, is actually feeling like a lawyer, like going to court. When you imagine yourself as a lawyer, you don't imagine yourself doing document review 80 hours a week and that's it, right? I mean, when you imagine yourself as a lawyer, at least for myself, it was going to the court, actually arguing, pleading to a jury. That's what I imagined a lawyer to be. And that's why I got into this, right? I mean, to actually litigate, not just over email, but in the court and convincing people and that kind of stuff. So that's a real cool thing when you're in the criminal bar, whether you're prosecutor or defense, you actually in court. And that might be frightening to some. It might not be for everyone. But if that is something you're looking for, like actual in-court experience, it's irreplaceable. The amount of trials that you do as a criminal defense counsel versus like someone in the civil bar. And I'm not saying this to disparage anybody in any other area of law. It's just the nature of it. Like in criminal, you're in court almost every day, whether it's a simple court appearance, a guilty plea, a pretrial application, a charter application, or a trial, you're in court. And that's not something that's normal to any other area of law, right? So that's a really cool thing, that you're actually in front of a court and having that experience and getting those reps.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people, if it's not in criminal defense, have an idea of, law being like at a desk 24/7 and just like a lot of reading. So it's nice that you have more of like an active diversity in that sense of being able to go
Mhm.
to court and doing all the other stuff. And you mentioned before, that there are really great days and really, high highs when you get to help a lot of people, but you also mentioned that there are rougher days, that are harder. So what would you say is the thing that you dislike the most about your job?
Where do I start? uh, Sometimes things are just out of your control. I mean, you can do your best to, um, instruct your client one way, and they might go around and do something completely different, right? Like you can have a 20-minute conversation with your client when they're being arrested. Don't say anything. Exercise your right to silence. And then, that's as much as you get. You got a chance to speak with your client, and then later on down the road, you get disclosure, and they have a 1 hour interview with your client where they're just saying everything, right? So that idea of like powerlessness. Also, sometimes it's you have to be ready to take calls at hours and times of the day that are not necessarily work hours, right? Like sometimes people are arrested really late in the day, um, and so that there's some anxiety to that. I mean, on a weekend, you want to just be relaxing and deal with your own thing. But if your client, you get a call from the police and they say, we have your client here and they're being held, um, then you got to shift gears. It's like, oh, I'm at brunch with my wife, but I have to have this 10-minute discussion with my client. So I have to step out. And so that kind of stuff is really annoying. It doesn't happen every weekend, but it does happen from time to time, and it's really great because my wife understands that's the nature of my work. But sometimes you just want to enjoy your weekend. You don't want to have it ruined by a phone call about your client being arrested. And then, I mean, the worst is when you feel that your application has merit and you lose, or even worse than that, if you feel as though your client is innocent and you lose the trial. And that's like the most devastating thing. It's because then it becomes this whole thing of like, it must have been my fault. What did I do wrong? And you go through this whole exercise of that. So yeah, I guess those are the things that I would say are the worst part of the job.
No, it's definitely understandable and can sound very overwhelming. But you go to court, and I'm sure you do other things on other days that you don't go to court. So what is a typical day in your day-to-day?
Typical day.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I mean, as defense counsel, you're doing consultations with prospective clients, signing retainers with them, or you're updating existing clients on matters. So a lot of it is still email because you gotta have to contact with the prosecutor and make sure. So start your day sending out emails, making sure that you're on top of your court appearances and you see what the status of each case is. See if something is delayed because it's on you. Like for instance, if the Crown is waiting on your response to an email, obviously you can't blame it on the Crown for taking too long. So doing that kind of stuff. That's typically day to day. And then, I mean, it's tough to say because some weeks you have like 2 weeks of trial, right? In which case that day to day is very different from if you don't have a trial scheduled in the week. You might be doing a guilty plea. And the good thing about, I would say, like one of the good things about this pandemic situation, it's caused the courts to actually transition to a more 21st century approach to law. Before we were sending like faxes and having to go in person to do very short adjournments. But now everything is being moved over to Zoom unless it's absolutely necessary for us to attend in person. So a lot of our day now is comprised of just logging onto Zoom links and doing court appearances that way. It's freed up our times immensely, travel time as well. So before in the dark ages, we'd have to actually drive to courthouses and wait until the Crown Calder matters, and that would take a lot of time and then drive back. But fortunately, now you just leave a Zoom link on and you work on something in the background and wait until your name is called. So yeah, that's typically what you're doing. You're doing court appearances, you're doing research sometimes. If there's something in the law that you're not sure about and you think it's worthy of being explored, you can do some research here and there. So it's different for every defense counsel too.
Sorry, yeah. But yeah, that sounds very time consuming from before. So it's good at least that, it's become more digital as everything
Yeah.
has changed with the pandemic. Um, but I'm sure you have a lot of clients. Do you think you have a typical client, or are they usually very, very different from one another?
Yeah, there's no typical client, not in criminal defense, because you can range from, someone who's homeless to someone who's like very high functioning in society, right? Someone who has a really good job, a family, and everything. So there is no real typical client. It spans all over. And even within the same charges, like you can have like 10 different people charged with, for instance, a sexual assault or an assault, and there's no such thing as a typical client. Yeah, not in this area of law.
So, your clients are very different, but do you think you take on, like, are there common cases or cases that come up more often than others?
Yeah, our office is primarily getting, defensive sex assault litigation. But we do like a variety of matters, whether it be DUIs, assaults, um, aggravated assaults, thefts, robberies. It's kind of all over the place, but we typically do sex assaults as well as domestic assault related charges. But even within that, it is extremely varied. I mean, because the definition of sexual assault can range from something like touching to, full on actual penetration. So even within those same charges that you're dealing with, there's a huge variance, right? And the issues can be anything from it never happened to it's consensual and everything in between that. So the charges may on paper look the same, but there's a huge amount of variance even within the same charges. So like 10 people can be charged of assault, for instance, and it can range from someone putting their hand on somebody's shoulder without their consent to another person punching them in the face, right? And it ranges so much. So I want to say we have a typical case like that we do, but even within the sex assault charges or the domestic assault charges, they vary from very, very, it could be like very minute to something that's a lot more serious.
Yeah, definitely. So, within that, do you feel like there's a case that has really stood out with you or, that has kept, coming up in your brain that you've never been able to like I guess not get over, but something that's really stayed with you?
Um, Probably my first trial. My first trial I lost. And that was a formative moment in my life because I really thought I could win that whole thing. And it was two complainants, 17 charges. He was guilty of 6 out of 17. I really thought he would have got acquitted of all 17. Um, but that one kept me up. That one kept me up a lot because I really thought I was going to win that one. And I really believed in my client, and I still do. Um, but I think that was formative for me because I again I was like, I gotta put more. I guess I gotta work on harder, and that's kind of stuck with me as well. Like it's the ones that you lose that really stick with you more than the ones you win. At least for me, I dwell on the losses more than I celebrate the wins, which is maybe not the best mental health approach to it, but it's been helpful in improving, I guess, as a lawyer. But yeah, I would say that one. I don't want to go too much into the factual circumstances of it, um, because obviously this is being recorded, and I don't know if I will slip up and maybe mention information that's potentially revealing about my client. So I won't go into too much into detail about that, but that's the one that really stuck with me. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. No, definitely. We completely want to respect any confidentiality of any cases that you have, but we really appreciate learning more about your specific cases and your experiences because it's definitely very eye-opening for any students that are interested in going into your field and learning about those day-to-days just kind of give us more insights because looking at TV and looking at I don't know, reading books about law or hearing from a friend of a friend might not be the most um you know certain way to learn about law. So it's really nice to hear about, one-on-one experiences. So speaking about that, is there any misconceptions that you feel like you want to, or like myths that you want to debunk about, your particular field of law or just being a lawyer in general?
Um, that every lawyer makes a lot of money. That's one that needs to be debunked. And that's something that every prospective lawyer or aspiring lawyer needs to hear. Um, it's like it doesn't matter what area of law you do, it's a business. If you don't have clients, you're not going to make money, right? So uh, it is what it is. Everyone will like go up to you and be like, "Oh, you're a lawyer now. You're making so much money." Blah 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 blah. No, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, the salary range is huge, especially in the defense bar. I think the defense bar, you'll see a huge range of people making shockingly low incomes, not worthwhile going to law school for, up to, depending on who you are, if you're representing celebrity people who are accused of crimes, then obviously you're making a lot more money, right? So that's a huge one that I think needs to be debunked. Like, depends what area you practice in, depends where you practice in, depends on your client load, depends on the firm, depends if you're going solo or if you're with a partner, all of those things. It's a business. If you don't have clients, you're not going to make money. So that's one thing. That's not to say it's not possible to make a good living doing this, because it totally is possible, but just don't think it's a given. And that should be something that you calculate in your mind when you think, is it worth putting $100,000 into my legal education to do this, right? Um, so that's one. The other thing that I'll say, and I know this is not going to apply to anybody that listens to this, but don't make a statement to the police. Okay, you have a right to remain silent. Doesn't matter if you're innocent. Any explanation you give to them is not going to help your situation out. So I've heard so many times where clients will be like, "Oh, well, I heard that if you show them evidence right away, that they won't proceed with the charges." No, at that point when they're arresting you, they've already formed reasonable grounds to arrest you, and nothing you show them is really going to change their mind. And in fact, everything that you say is going to be looked at with skepticism, and they're going to pick it apart, and it's going to be horrible for you later on. And it's not going to change your situation. Have your lawyer deal with it later. You have your day in court if you want to testify. Don't say anything to police. So those are my two big things. Nothing you say is going to help you. Not all lawyers are rich. Know that before you decide to go to law school.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know definitely I had a lot of misconceptions about law before I started, doing session coordinating with pre-law shadowers, the money thing or, that everything would be fast paced all the time or even things like you said right now, with police, we learn a lot more through these sessions. So, what to going like completely switching topics, but what advice do you think you would give to your younger self looking back, at your journey?
Um, I would say definitely put yourself out there more. And anytime there's like a social event or networking opportunity, to jump on that. Because the reality is, how well you do in law school doesn't necessarily equate to you getting the best job available. And that's not a shocker, but That's the truth. It's not a meritocracy. Sometimes it's getting your face out there. And that was something that I was very averse to. I hated doing that. Anytime someone talked about like, oh, a cocktail event where you meet other lawyers, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm an introvert at heart. And I know a lot of people are introverted at heart, and that kind of stuff makes them very uncomfortable. But get out of your comfort zone and start networking. That's really, really important. It was a lot harder for me to build a network because I started so late. Um, when there's a networking event in law school, go out and do it. Um, even though you really hate it and you dread it, mentally prepare yourself for it and put your face out there. Because even if you're doing great work and even if you're doing really well, no one is going to know until you tell them that you're doing really well and you're doing great work. And that's just that's how society is propped up. Unfortunately, it's not always about who's the smartest in law school and who cares the most. Sometimes it's about who's visible, right? And especially for minorities, I know it may be difficult to get out of their comfort zone, especially when you're seeing all these other lawyers that don't really necessarily look like you, and may not have the same, um, I guess, likes and dislikes as you. But go out there and try to network as much as possible. And I would give that very strongly to my younger self. Be like, hey, suck it up, man. I don't care if you're an introvert and you want to stay home. Like, go out there and talk to some people, put your face out there, tell them why you care. And you, at least in the criminal defense bar, we're very, very generous with our time. If any student comes up to me and says, like, look, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you just give me some insight? You want to have a coffee? Like 99 out of 100 times, the defense lawyer is going to be like, I'm really busy, but let's figure out a time and send me an email and we'll get it done. Right. So they're gracious with their time. If any of you or anyone else watching this wants to reach out, I'm open to speaking with them and kind of talking more about some of the things we touched on here or anything else. Right. So go out there, talk to lawyers and figure it out.
Thank you for that. Well, I guess you already answered this question, but just as a final thing, if you want to have anything else, just any more advice for the future generation of upcoming lawyers.
I'm still an upcoming lawyer too.
Yeah.
But if you future advice, I would say like, don't be happy with the status quo. Like if you go into a position and someone says this is how it's done, this is how it's always done, who cares? If you can find a better way to do something, go for it. And in this profession, a lot of people are going to bully you because you don't have experience, whether that's explicitly or implicitly, whether it's through like a really kind of like passive aggressive email you get from senior counsel, or you're just passed off or not listened to, you know, that happens. But don't let that kind of have you conform to what has always been done or what it is the way that it is. Or if you see some merit in a case and you really believe in that, it doesn't matter. Screw all the other people that are saying that you're crazy. I mean, if you really believe in it and you have some merit to it and you have the receipts to prove it, go for it, right? And at the end of the day, this is like a kind of like a maxim that we have in our law firm specifically because we're fairly young. It's preparation is the greatest equalizer in the courtroom. Like if you have 30 years of experience, but you put 5 minutes of work, that can be trumped with someone with zero experience, but put 30 hours of work. So don't be too scared to face off against people who are more experienced than you. And challenge the status quo if you really see that it's unjust. And that's super cheesy, but I think it's a message that you got to hear. Like the law has a bunch of stuff like that. Oh, this is the way it's done. Oh, that's just how it's done. Oh, why do we send faxes? Why can't we just email? Oh, because faxes, because that's how it's done, right? Something as innocuous as that, right? It took a freaking pandemic for us to realize that email is just as good as fax. That's just to show you how slow moving the law is. And the more and more future lawyers come in and just, it is the way it is, less likely we're going to have change, right? So believe in your case and screw the non-believers. Go for it.
Thank you. Well, that's, very useful advice. Very, very, just, helpful. And so that was it for all of my questions. Thank you so much, Isaac. But I just want to give any chance to any guests that we have. So, Sabrina, if you do have any questions, if not, it's okay. No pressure, but just giving you an opportunity to ask.
So for law school, I know like I've heard that GPA, LSAT, and extracurriculars, do you think one matters more than the other, or just in general they all weigh like around the same? Or do you think like the LSAT matters the most, GPA, extracurriculars, etc.?
Thing that matters most is GPA and LSAT because that is the objective, standard, right? And then after that, your personal statement, and then after that is your extracurriculars, right? It doesn't matter how incredibly moving your personal statement and your extracurriculars are if you don't meet the minimum cutoff line for GPA and LSAT scores. It can, in some instances, for instance, if you're a mature student, there may be some exceptions, or I'm not sure how every school does it, but there may be avenues to get in despite being below those cutoffs. But the best way to ensure you get in is get your GPA up. Like, I'm not going to lie to you, like get your GPA up. If it says 3.7 minimum, get it up to 3.7 minimum. And if the LSAT says 160 minimum, get it like 165, right? Because at the end of the day, 3,000 students are applying to 300 spots, right? And it doesn't matter if you've done a million extracurriculars. If you go below those two cutoff lines, you're not going to get in. Probably not. Okay, so those are the two most important things. And the fortunate thing, again, from my experience, I took the LSAT multiple times. The best score counts, right? They're not going to penalize you generally on the fact that you've taken it multiple times. So if you want to take it the first time just as a throwaway and just to know what the experience was like, go for that. See where you're at, and then determine how much you need to study after that, right? So LSAT score is super important. It's the necessary evil.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty then. Well, thank you so much. And we're just gonna end the recording here then. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Isaac, again for coming in. We really appreciate it. And yes, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for having me.